WWE isn't wrestling. I do not say this as a matter of taste. I'm not saying the WWE style isn't wrestling, nor the way they present it. This isn't a video about pro wrestling versus sports entertainment. I am not saying WWE isn't wrestling in regards to quality. I'm saying WWE isn't wrestling anymore because of its quantity. Let me explain. This is a penguin chocolate bar. Or is it? Because while it looks like a chocolate bar, smells like a chocolate bar, and, according to McVitie's consumer research, tastes just like a chocolate bar, it isn't legally one. This is because, in 2025, McVitie's reduced the amount of cocoa solids in their penguin bars. Cocoa solids are one of the primary components of chocolate. It's the part of the cocoa bean that gives chocolate its colour, flavour, and nutritional value. So, to be able to call your product a chocolate bar in the UK, at least 20% of it must be these cocoa solids. But because the new versions would fall below that threshold, legally, McVitie's could no longer call their penguin chocolate bars chocolate bars. McVitie's excuse was the rising global cost of cocoa beans. They simply couldn't afford the same quality of ingredients as before because global warming, blah blah blah, wars, blah blah blah. Its parent company's most recent financial report, which is totally unrelated, shows their revenue increased 17% year on year. So if a chocolate bar can't be called a chocolate bar when it doesn't have enough chocolate in it, what do you call it? Penguin bars, and others that fall below the 20% cocoa solids threshold, like Clubs and Nestlé's Toffee Crisp and Blue Riband, are now called chocolate-flavoured products. As in, they aren't actually chocolate. Instead, they give the fake impression of chocolate, or, in wrestling parlance, worked chocolate. But if a wrestling show doesn't have enough wrestling in it, what do we call that? Until relatively recently, a pro wrestling pay-per-view or premium live event's biggest ingredient would be, unsurprisingly, pro wrestling, the actual in-ring bell-to-bell action. After that, you'd have the non-in-ring wrestling parts like post-match angles, promos, or in-ring segments. Then there would be entrances, then video packages, and then, finally, there would be a small percentage of filler, usually from the commentary team, where you would talk about the attendance, upcoming shows, and some sponsors. To convince fans to buy their wrestling pay-per-views, promoters had to ensure it was chock full of the best ingredients, the biggest stars, paying off the most engrossing storylines in lengthy main event matches. Our Patreon is exactly the same. You pay for exclusive videos without commercial breaks. In fact, you can go over to patreon.com/WrestleTalk right now for an exclusive commercial-free podcast of me and Luke discussing this WWE isn't wrestling topic. The pay-per-view, or PLE model, is distinctly different from the other main kind of wrestling programming, weekly TV, which have an additional main ingredient: commercials. An old 3-hour USA Network episode of Raw, for instance, would be made up of 50 to 55 minutes of commercial breaks. That means 28% of its runtime, almost a third, is adverts selling you stuff. This is because weekly TV, outside of getting a cable package, is free to consume. Fans don't expect so much chocolate in the chocolate bar they got for free. So WWE mostly fill Raw and SmackDown with angles, storylines, and promos. Those are then used to build the climactic wrestling matches on pay-per-view where there are no commercials, or at least there shouldn't be, because that's never been the case before 2026. This is a chocolate bar graph. Yes, that is an excellent pun. And it shows that in the year 2000, where WWE's pay-per-view business hit its peak, driven by competition with WCW, an average pay-per-view was made up of 61% in-ring wrestling. By 2014, which was the first year of the network, that number had decreased to 54%. But that's not so bad. It's the same average percentage as NXT's Black and Gold TakeOver era from 2014 to 2021, which is widely seen as a consistently excellent in-ring run. Then, in 2022, the last full year before TKO took over, the average percentage of wrestling pay-per-views had decreased to 51%. But rather than a reduction of in-ring action, that was instead driven by the shows being half an hour longer on average. The actual average amount of in-ring time per show was at an all-time high. The first 2 years of the TKO era held relatively steady at 50% in-ring wrestling per show, but then, in September 2025, ESPN happened. For the first time in WWE history, shows on ESPN saw the average amount of in-ring wrestling dip below 50%, falling to 49% on average. At WrestleMania, the company's biggest event of the year, it fell as low as 36%. In fact, the downward trend of wrestling on your wrestling show is particularly stark when you focus on just WrestleMania. 62% of WrestleMania 2000 was made up of in-ring wrestling. I'm not saying it was good wrestling, just that it was wrestling. This dips to 51% of WrestleMania 30 to 44% of WrestleMania 40 and 41 to just an average of 37% in-ring wrestling across both nights of WrestleMania 42. And this is because ESPN had replaced time that was once used for wrestling with an ingredient that was previously only part of the free TV version. For the first time in wrestling history, commercial breaks were now a major part of shows you had paid to watch. In night one of WrestleMania 42, there were 39 minutes of commercial breaks, or 17% of the overall chocolate bar. This time was directly taken from in-ring wrestling matches, with many climactic storylines being shortchanged. If the commercial breaks were removed, each match could have been 5.5 minutes longer. And this isn't just for WrestleMania. On average, in the ESPN era, there have been 29 minutes of commercial breaks per show you have paid for, roughly 14% of the total running length. All while the cost of watching a WWE PLE has almost tripled, from $10.99 a month on Peacock to $30 a month on ESPN+. This isn't by accident. Just like McVitie's Penguin Bars, or the decreasing size of a Pringles crisp, or Wrigley's changing the shape of their packaging to disguise there are 14 fewer pieces of gum inside. These are intentional strategies called shrinkflation, where you reduce the size of servings, or skimpflation, where you replace ingredients for cheaper alternatives. But the evil idea is that you do it subtly, so the vast majority of people never notice, meaning TKO are either bad at their jobs, or they don't care, as its COO Mark Shapiro impatiently said following WrestleMania 42. The WWE, in particular, is truly new to commercial integration and sponsorship. Change will be more glaring for some as we inevitably commercially integrate. Remember this, our audience is resilient. Which, let me put that through the business speak translator here, means fans are dumb marky marks. We're gonna put as many commercial breaks in as we possibly can. It sometimes feels hopeless. What difference can us poor dumb marky marks expect to make upon the multi-billion-dollar WWE parent company? Or we're gonna do what any brave person would do when faced with such adversity: make a rating system! Consumer watchdog organizations call out companies for anything that negatively impacts the people who buy their products or services. This could be for unsafe items, misleading advertising, impossible to cancel subscriptions. But understandably, because it's not really high on ordinary people's list of priorities, there isn't one to protect consumers from the shrink or skimpflation of wrestling shows. So from now on, we will measure the total in-ring time, the total commercial break time, and the percentage of each the show duration for every PLE we review here at WrestleTalk. We will then see if they pass the 40-15 rule. If a pay-per-view or PLE has either less than 40% in-ring wrestling or more than 15% commercial breaks, it does not deserve to be called a wrestling show. For comparison, every AEW pay-per-view of 2025 passes the test maybe too well, with 66% in-ring wrestling and 0% commercials. This probably requires its own kind of health warning. AEW shows may cause type 2 wrestling sicko. Not a single WWE, AEW or NXT show fails the 40-15 rule until WrestleMania 42, which is exactly when ESPN began to heavily include commercial breaks in the paid-for shows. Night 1 failed both wrestling and commercials at 36% and 17% respectively. Night 2 failed with only 38% in-ring wrestling. Backlash and Clash in Italy passed the wrestling thresholds but failed commercials with 15% each. What do you call a chocolate bar without enough chocolate in it? A chocolate-flavored bar. What do you call these wrestling shows without enough wrestling in them? A wrestling-flavored show. We should not accept these events as wrestling by our standards. They are penguins.
We see significant potential to drive growth through the Endeavor flywheel, from media rights and sponsorship to event operations and premium